Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is James Rondeau. I'm thrilled to be the president and Eloise W. Martin director of this great museum. It's my honor, distinct honor and privilege to welcome you, our members, to today's program as we open Mel Bochner Drawings, a retrospective. And I know it's become already such a cliche and a chestnut, but how wonderful to be back together in person. So Mel, there's so much to say, and we're going to say it all in the next 50 minutes, but we are looking at a career that has spanned 6 decades. Mel has been at the forefront of what we now call conceptual art and all of its permutations, but conceptual art hasn't defined Mel Bochner. Mel Bochner has helped define conceptual art, challenge the terminology, expand it, and make it the elastic, important, enduring concept that we inherit today. Mel's been defining and revising the term across all media as well. We're looking at drawing specifically in this exhibition, but we know that Mel has been working with prints, photography, sculpture, books, installations, and more. So I hope that you're all able to spend time with the exhibition. It's just right next door. We have members preview immediately following this program. The show opens to the public tomorrow. Mel has a very long and very close history with our museum. We're going to hear in a minute from Kevin Salatino, who is the Anne Vogt Fuller and Marion Titus Searle Chair and Curator of Prints and Drawings, one of the greatest titles in the world. He's going to mention his colleague and co-curator, Emily Ziemba, but I want to also mention and acknowledge Kevin and Emily organizing this with an extraordinary team in Prints and Drawings. Historically, our colleague Mark Pascal, who's with us tonight, has also been an important steward and advocate and scholar and expert of Mel's work. And Mark and I worked together in 2006 on a retrospective look at Mel's work with language. But we're returning tonight to drawing. It's been a foundational and irreducible medium for the artist. I also, as I look out into this room tonight, it's so many friends and family. I guess that's what members mean, but I want to call out just a couple additional people who are here with us. I want to recognize my colleague Ann Goldstein, who is Deputy Director and the Chair of Modern and Contemporary Art, who's worked closely with Mel over many, many years. In fact, Ann's work with Mel in exhibition in Los Angeles had the wonderful and indirect but direct impact on our collection because of Anne's work with Mel, so long-standing and close relationship there that we benefit from. I want to acknowledge Mel's assistant, James Powers, who's with us tonight. Also, an important artist in her own right, Lisbeth Morano, is here with us. Mel happens to have the distinction of being partners in life with Lisbeth, but that's just one of the points of distinction. And Mel's daughter, Piera Bochner, I think is here. I don't have my glasses on. Are Lisbeth and Piera both in the room, Mel? Somewhere. Are they in a, okay, anyway. Here or not, Lisbeth and Piera, we celebrate and welcome. And lastly, I want to recognize Mel's gallerists, 4 of whom are here: Jeffrey Frankel, Mark Selwyn, Peter Freeman, Lawrence Markey, all close friends of this museum, as they are to so many museums across the world, and great advocates for Mel. So welcome, everybody. And with that, I turn it over to my colleague and friend, Kevin Salatino. Ken?
Thank you, James. Oh, is that too loud? I'm sorry, I'm turning my phone off because invariably a telemarketer calls in the middle of anything I'm doing. Thank you. Good afternoon, although it feels like evening, and welcome. As James said, I'm Kevin Salatino. I'm not going to give you my title, full title at any rate, Chair and Curator of Prints and Drawings, and co-curator with Emily Ziemba, Director of Curatorial Administration in our department of Prints and Drawings of Mel Bochner Drawings, a retrospective, although Emily would agree with me that it really feels as if it is a show that was not curated by us, but very much by the artist himself. A number of you have heard this anecdote that I'm about to tell before, so forgive me because many have not. But I want to talk a little bit about the history of Mel at the Art Institute. And I'm going to share that very briefly because I'm moving on to this. There we are. The Art Institute and Mel Bochner have a long history, as James already indicated. When Mel was a graduate student studying philosophy at Northwestern, on a visit, because he often skipped class, on a visit to the Art Institute one day in the fall of 1963, he wandered into the then very different Department of Prints and Drawings, really just a very small room. A distinguished-looking gentleman with a vaguely European-sounding accent asked him what he wanted to look at, a question that Mel found puzzling. "We have everything," the gentleman said. "Who do you like?" Mel, unable to think of anyone else at the moment, asked, "Do you have Rembrandt?" "Of course," the distinguished-looking gentleman said, and disappeared into storage, returning a few minutes later with a box of Rembrandt prints. Mel, astonished, asked if they were reproductions. They were not, of course. This being the Art Institute, they were in fact superb impressions of Rembrandt's finest etchings. And the distinguished-looking gentleman was Harold Joachim, the legendary head for 25 years of the Art Institute's Department of Prints and Drawings, and a man who loved anyone who loved art, and who opened the department's holdings to anyone who was interested, no credentials required, a policy we continue to this day. In that Rembrandt moment, Mel had something of an epiphany. He said to Harold, "You mean that Rembrandt actually touched this piece of paper?" He was suddenly struck by the meaning of Walter Benjamin's word aura, as in the aura of a work of art, and he realized in that moment that he did not want to study philosophy, he wanted to make things. So I think it's fair to say that the Art Institute changed Mel's life. He'll tell us otherwise, since he's here. And he'd continue to visit Harold several times a week for several weeks during that period and look and talk about lots of other art. That, by the way, is, as you can see, Mel in 1962 and Harold Joachim. Mel returned to the Art Institute a decade later in a different form, in the form of his own work, having become in the interim a well-respected artist. In 1974, Annie Rorimer included him in her exhibition Idea and Image in Recent Art, the catalog cover of which you see on the left, and on the right, Mel's measurement drawing from 1969, included, or a form of which was included in the show. Almost exactly a decade later, in 1985, we seem to do things in 10-year increments here, the Art Institute would acquire its first work by Mel, 1984's painting Fjord, an installation view, of which you see from 1996 on the left. By the early aughts, our representation of Mel's work had grown significantly. Here you see a number of the sculptures that enter the collection, including in the installation photo on the far left, Untitled Five-Part Progression, 1966. It's the orange or colored sculpture that is about halfway, almost to the right of the center of the installation slide on the left. I mention that especially because the Department of Modern and Contemporary Art, thank you, Anne, has installed that sculpture on the second floor of the modern wing for the duration of the exhibition. In fact, the Art Institute currently holds, in all, 9 sculptures, 1 painting, 17 drawings, 55 prints, and 16 photos, that's one series, by Mel. So we have very rich holdings now of Mel. In 2006, the Art Institute organized a major exhibition of Mel's work, Mel Bochner Language, 1966 to 2006, co-organized with Marc Pascal and Lisa Doran by none other than James Rondeau, who was then the Francis and Thomas Dittmer Chair of Contemporary Art at the Art Institute. Our current exhibition, unlike Mel Bochner Language, or in fact any previous exhibition of Bochner's work, is the first ever to use drawing as its principal organizing focus, foregrounding the importance of that medium within Mel's practice from its beginnings in the 1960s to the present. The show, through its nearly 90 works, demonstrates Mel's pioneering role in redefining the traditional boundaries of drawing, illuminating his ideas about seriality, temporality, and the slippage between word and image. I think you'll find it a revelation. A few quick reminders. The museum will close at 5 o'clock as this program ends. If you weren't able to see the exhibition at today's member preview, please come back between now and August 22nd when the show closes. And so, without further ado, our conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Maybe we'll have the first slide. Yes. It's a work that I know well, but you framed 2 issues which I guess I did understand, but they weren't top of mind this morning in conversation. The first one is that this is 1966, And your first exhibition isn't until 1972 or 73? 72. So you are 6 years away from exhibiting, and it's so easy to forget that the subject of this work and other works related, individuals who've become so extraordinarily well known and so closely linked to your own generation, to your own work, were not well-known individuals at this moment. So you weren't showing, and these individuals weren't known. And it's really easy to forget those two things in the rear view mirror. So I'm asking you again I promise for the last time, to take responsibility for 1966. But can you go back a little bit and tell me about the sort of structure of this idea of portraiture and language, or just open the door to the show maybe with this work, if you will?
As a kid, I was a really good drawer. And I liked to draw people's pictures. As time went on in art school and after, my work became more and more abstract, and drawing people's pictures was sort of impossible within the work and language that I was evolving. But I still wanted to find a way to do that, to think about portraiture in some way. And it occurred to me that, a drawing is a representation, but a word is also a representation. So these were people who were my friends, and like James said, Eva had never had a show. Saul had one show, which didn't get much attention. Smithson was a little better known as a writer. And so I decided to use words to, literally paint a picture with words. And the place to find words is in the thesaurus. So I went through this thesaurus and looked for a word that would kind of sum up the person and their work and their personality. So this one, this portrait of Eva, I think if you read it, you get a very good picture of her, actually. And I put it in this form which sort of parodied her sculpture at that point. What was most interesting to me about this drawing, and led me in a lot of directions for years, was the fact that you couldn't read it without turning your head or standing on your head. So it reoriented the viewer to the work and brought the body, one's feeling of themselves into it. Now, this morning somebody was asking me to explain the words, and it's not about explaining the words. They create a sense, a feeling, and they're very private, and the people who were depicted, in a sense, in these drawings, understood them because it's part of a context, but that context can never be returned to. And I think James's points were very good, because over the years people have said, oh, you had really famous friends. You were drawing, famous artists. No, they weren't. They became, but they weren't then.
I think that one of the great things for me about these works as an entry point for thinking, but as an entry point for today's discussion, is that you're here in 66, and then you take a very, very long and complicated journey, which you're very obviously still very much on, and eventually come back to the thesaurus. I mean, there's a kind of, actually a circularity, a kind of a loop, but there's a whole lot in between this work and the beginning of the thesaurus paintings, for example, in the 2000s. But I want to turn it to Kevin, but the other thing with this work, and you could really choose literally any work, but it occurs to me that, you know, I feel like I know you and your work so well, I actually didn't prepare for this conversation at all, except I wrote 3 words down. That was my exercise in preparation. And I wrote down the word...
You're a busy guy, I know.
It's all up here somewhere, I hope. But I wrote down the word systems, and in this case, the system is language, but there are other systems, mathematics, philosophy, architecture, there are many, many forms of systems. The second word I wrote down was structure, which can also mean shape, which in this case, shape and structure are overlapping. And the third word that I wrote down was surface. And surface can mean a million things in your work, but for me, primarily 2 things. One, surface can mean plane, like a measurement, like a wall work, right? But surface can also mean something that may be the most neglected aspect of your reception, which is touch, which is gesture, right? Which is mark making.
Yes.
Like you are a painter, a draftsman, right? You have a touch. And so surface can also mean touch. And somehow the portrait of Eva gets us to all of those. And that those 3 dumb words are not the totality of your practice, but they're a primer.
But they're
a primer.
They're very important.
And they get, so these portraits open those doors for me, but I loved when I wrote down the word surface, and I was like, what do I mean? Because a measurement wall drawing or a language is not transparent. The surface is the plane.
Yes.
But our favorite thing to talk about, a painting or the revelatory work from the Albright Knox in this exhibition, the surface is all about touch and mark making.
Well,
I'd love to begin and turn things over to Kevin and you, but to
just let me
unpack
say,
some of those.
yeah, just want to say one thing, which is, you know, I studied painting. I was a painter. I wanted to paint. That's basically all I lived for. Maybe it wasn't so much that painting disappointed me as I disappointed painting. And I just reached a point where I didn't like what I was doing. It was too derivative. It was very hard to escape the late 50s and early 60s from abstract expressionism and, you know, Newman, Klein, and I loved Dubuffet. I liked all of these things which were more or less contradictory. So how do you put this all together? And I just decided I couldn't. So I stopped painting and tried to find something else to do. And I think what's interesting about all 4 of the subjects of these portraits is they arrived at a very similar point, at a very similar time, because everybody was a painter. Eva was a very good painter. Saul, Smithson. And so the way I look at it is that the death of painting was a crime of passion because you were killing something that you loved. But it never quite dies.
No, never.
It never quite dies.
So, Mel, I wanted to ask you about this group of drawings, and we'll get away from it in a moment, but it's very, very interesting because it's a drawing, and it's a collection of words, and it's both, it constitutes a conventional drawing in one respect, in that it's mark making on a piece of paper, but it subverts all notions of what constitutes a portrait, among other things. But I wanted to ask you a quick technical question. How deliberative was this process? In other words, is there a pencil drawing under the ink words? Did you plot it out as you would a traditional preparatory drawing?
I can't remember, but if I look at it,
I mean, we could ask our conservators.
that is a good question. As I'm looking at it now on this little screen, there had to have been some pencil drawing to keep the words going around and parallel to the outer edge. Whether I went in and actually penciled it, I might have.
I mean, both the concentric layers as well as the fit in
Yeah,
each concentric
exactly,
form work. So they had to be plotted where you were.
Yeah, but there was no, I don't know.
It wasn't
Well,
over deliberated.
But I also
No,
want
it
to, I
wasn't.
want people to recognize the fact that this is also a shaped piece of
Yeah, it's cut out.
paper.
It's a shaped piece
It's like
of
a shaped drawing as opposed to a shaped painting. And that in itself, and it's mimicking one of Eva Hess's sculptures. But we've talked about how this reminds me of Apollinaire's Calligrams and concrete poetry of the early 20th century, and even going back to medieval
I don't like concrete poetry.
Well, no, I know that. And going back to Carmina Figurata, et cetera. And you said,
Yes.
I knew all those things, but what I was really thinking about was Rauschenberg's, this is a portrait of Iris Clare, if I say so, which is,
Well, Rauschenberg, there was an article about Rauschenberg in the New Yorker by, it was Calvin Tompkins, right? Yeah, in 62 or 60.
He won't stop to this day.
Of course.
Relentless profiles. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. There was an article about Rauschenberg in the New Yorker, and he had been asked to do a portrait of this gallerist in Paris, Iris Clare. And he sent her a telegram, and it said, "This is a portrait of Iris Clare." She got really pissed off, and she wrote back, "This is not a portrait of Iris Clare." And he sent another telegram, which said, "This is a portrait of Iris Clare if I say it is." That was another one of those liberating moments in my life. You just have to say it is, that's all. This is a portrait of Eva Hess. Why? I said it is. And that takes the idea of will or volition to a different place.
I love this drawing. What I find fascinating about this drawing, and partly, and even more so now, because earlier you told me what the original impetus or catalyst was for it. I don't know how many of you in this audience remember a movie from the 1950s, right? Or was it 60s?
50s.
It was called Lust for Life, with Kirk Douglas playing Vincent van Gogh. Does anyone remember? Show of hands, who remembers that movie? Yeah, okay, good, we've got a great audience
It's
here.
on Netflix.
Because for me, beyond the fact that this, I mean, you look at this and you think, how is that a drawing? That's not a drawing. But it is if you say it's a drawing.
I say it's a drawing.
And and so that while Lust for Life was the impetus for this, you were thinking, what would minimalism, if it were turned into a movie, look like? Who would play the key roles? And then you came up with a group of actors. What I find fascinating about this drawing now is that someone of my generation looks at this drawing and laughs and laughs and laughs, or recognizes all of those names. It is now an historical artifact. I guarantee you that there is no one under the age of 30 in this room who will recognize any of those names. So then you have to Google each of them to determine who they are. So it must feel rather strange now to make an object that was it was parodying in a way both Hollywood popular culture and minimalism, because you have an unusual relationship with minimalism. You described it, I think, as somewhere to begin, not to end.
Yeah.
And yet, it parodies that, but it also reflects upon and caricatures to some degree minimalism. So what was besides the obvious, what I just said, Lust for Life, what was the other impetus behind this? And at what point did this stop being a personal object, a private object, and became a public object?
I was just walking down the street one day, and it struck me that that had been a favorite movie of mine when I was a kid. I mean, that movie, the romantic idea of being an artist, I mean, to a 15-year-old who'd never seen a painting in their life, it was awesome. You know, I want to be out in the wheat fields painting. So I was walking down the street one day, I don't know why, and I was thinking, what's the most unlikely thing you can think of? Making a movie about minimalism. You know, you'd be showing some cubes and some great paintings.
Very long, fixed shots.
Yes, very long, fixed, boring shots. But then I thought, who would play the roles? The first one that popped in my mind was Jackie Gleason as Flavin. Well,
Which is a kind of a backhanded compliment.
might not be a compliment.
Yeah, or maybe not backhanded.
Maybe not backhanded.
Yeah.
So then I just went from there. Judd, Morris, LeWay. Then you got to throw in Leo Castelli. I mean, you know, somebody's got to sell this stuff.
Yeah.
And on and on and on.
I want to know how Robert Smithson shifted from being originally Richard Burton to Jack Palance, who I met once in the cafe at Lagmont and went up and talked to him for a while.
He was an art lover?
He was an art lover and a painter. Not a good one, but he
That's
painted.
really- yeah.
But you digress. I digress.
I don't know why. It's just when I was looking at it after I first did it, I thought, because Jack Palance had that kind of evil thing, you know, the snarl, and Smithson had that too. Yeah, he did.
See, for me, what's great about this drawing is the way in which, I mean, in some ways it's just funny.
Yeah,
And it's
I think
clearly
it's
a
funny.
thought exercise.
Yeah.
But in a more serious way, it presages this notion that we understand today, but would have been very difficult to understand at the moment that you made this, other than perhaps for you, the way in which minimalism as an idea, as an aesthetic, as a conceit, moved into mass culture, like almost immediately.
Right.
Almost immediately became a kind of, like it integrated faster than pop art in some ways, integrated into culture at large, even though the reversal in terms of the dynamic of source and art. So this quite kind of humorously, like synthesizes but summarizes the fact that minimalism goes mass culture, like 5
Really-
minutes.
really fast.
Really fast. And so that's why this, I think, is a funny joke, but that's lasting as a kind of architecture of ideas, because that one aspect presages, and also a kind of culture of celebrity that we didn't think of with Eva or Saul or you or Judd, but that these artists have all become kind of, in a way, almost all of them mythical makers or mythical figures, and pairing them with Hollywood actors acknowledges the kind of myth-making behind.
Well, I love that there was a time where all you had to do was write BB, and everyone knew you were talking about Brigitte Bardot. But the private to the public, when was it, who made the decision? At one point was it made to pull this out of a drawer, frame it, put it on a wall, and call it a drawing?
I don't remember.
That's as good an answer as
It
any.
might have been Dick Field when we did the Yale retrospective, because that was when the portraits came out of the drawer and
But there's
got shown.
a lot of your work. I mean, the story that you were recalling this morning about working with Ann Goldstein on the sculptures that are now in the collection. I mean, you did the work in the studio, 10 to 6, not 9 to 5, but
10
you
to
did the work and
5:30.
5:30, and maybe it left, maybe it went to the drawer. You did the work, and the world had to wait in some cases for its relevance, for your willingness, for an opportunity. There are a million reasons, but you did the
Yeah,
work.
there was
and-
only one reason: nobody was interested in it.
but you,
I mean, because you don't.
you more than most made important work that wasn't shown until later. in the earliest.
You can say that, I can't say.
Yeah. In the 60s and 70s, you made important work that wasn't shown until there was sometimes a key gap.
Yeah,
sometimes a 40-year gap, sometimes a 4-year
There was a lag.
gap.
There was a certain lag, which didn't make me happy, but I couldn't change what I was doing just because nobody liked it or understood it, or it had no commercial value. When I did the photo pieces, I invited some dealers over to see them. And one dealer who will remain unknown said, okay, I'll show these, but I want you to silk screen them on canvas. So why would I silk screen them on canvas? Well, then they'd be really saleable because nobody's going to buy a photograph. So you can't sell a photograph in an art gallery. That's not my problem. I said, and I'm not going to make these into Andy Warhols.
Right. This is ideation, not exhibition making at that point, which is really an important distinction. And some of what we see in the show would have been made with an exhibition opportunity in mind.
Yes.
Right? And some of it made on site. I mean, here, this is a perfect segue, particularly when you get into site specificity and work made directly on the wall. In other cases, private ideation becomes a kind of key fundamental building block of the work.
Well,
and that's what we continue to recuperate.
I think it depends on what your idea of being an artist is. To make something new or to think something new. I mean, I never thought something like this would ever be made, and nobody was interested in making it, and I didn't even know how it would be made. Would those be cardboard boxes, wooden boxes, metal boxes? But the idea of filling this space so that a person, almost like a blind person, had to walk around, feeling their way through the gallery.
Can you tell us the more basic aspects of what we're looking at in this rendering?
Yeah, this is a proposal for a gallery exhibition where the whole space would be filled. So you wouldn't be looking at something. It would just be the experience of finding your way through or around this thing. I never thought, well, how would you make it? What would you do? Blah, blah. It just seemed like a really interesting idea. That was enough for me. And in many cases, it's still enough for me. But nobody was going to say, oh yeah, I want to make this and put it in my gallery. We have some dealers here. Would you do that?
I was just going to say, Mark would do that.
Yeah, actually, yeah, some of these guys would do it.
But we've moved from a drawing of a very different sort to a drawing of this is almost, you could argue, an architectural drawing, so it becomes a working drawing, but never executed. Some of the most interesting drawings of the late 18th century during the French Revolution, because there were no patrons to commission architecture, and there were all these brilliant architectural draftsmen around, and they made extraordinary visionary drawings, like Boulet, et cetera, right, yeah, and Soufflot. They made visionary drawings because they knew their works would never be built. And we look back at those with a kind of regard that they would not have had in their own day. I mean, they have resonance now to a degree they didn't then. In a way, I just wanted to make that distinction that we're looking at. You're always pushing you both work within the boundaries of what constitutes a traditional drawing, and then you push outside the boundaries, and that constitutes both the ground on which you work, or grounds on which you work, the media in which you work. And James referenced earlier this kind of, not so much tension, more like a canoodle between the cerebral and the sensual. And he loves material, especially Conte crayon and charcoal and on all these traditional artists' materials. And in fact, I'm going to just skip, let's talk about that, because I love this drawing. James.
No, invite Mel to describe first what we're looking at, if you will.
It's a proposal for an installation. It's called Smudge. And it's just a blue I was very interested in using materials that weren't traditional art materials, things that were sort of like ready at hand. They were in your studio already. You didn't have to go out and purchase them in order to make something. So this was blue carpenter's chalk. And it's a bit of a long story.
We're here.
But anyway, there were three things that happened in the 60s that were very important to me. One was the student revolution in Paris, where the students were out on the streets writing slogans and things on the wall.
What's the great one? We have opted for surrealism in the streets.
Yes.
That's the best one.
Or one of the most poetic ones was, beneath the paving stones, the beach. Anyway, I thought these were really kind of amazing and direct, and I liked the fact that they were ephemeral, but they had like specific meaning. Another thing was a show at the Metropolitan Museum where the Italian government sent over these incredible frescoes that had been stripped off of the walls because of the flood and the war and everything. And most artists of my generation had never been to Italy. But these things were gigantic. I mean, we thought Newman, Still, Rothko, man, those are big paintings. But when you see a Castagno that's as big as this room, you think like, there's something else going on here. But they stripped the painting off the wall. They stripped the level of plaster off the wall. And it exposed the underdrawing, which is called a synopia, which is usually in red chalk. And where the Renaissance paintings are when you're doing fresco, it's very tight. It's just one brush stroke. But these synopia, they're the same size. They were just, guy would come in, sketch it in, and start painting. So that idea of doing it like just drawing something directly on the wall. And then the last thing was Andy Warhol had a show. Maybe it was his last show at Castelli, I'm not sure. But in the front room, he had these silver balloons just floating around, which wasn't that far out because a lot of people were doing balloons at that time. But in the back room, he had the cow wallpaper. So you came into this room, and it surrounded you completely. The walls were the room was the walls. And it puts you in a psychologically very different relationship, because where everybody like Frank Stella and Kenneth Nolan and all these people were talking about flatness, these really were flat. It was wallpaper. So those ideas were going around in my head. And just one day, I was in my studio, and I dipped my hand in this carpenter's chalk. I just rubbed it on the wall, and it made this kind of like windshield wiper, just natural shape. And that's the first thing I did directly on the wall, I think. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think it is.
And for me, too, it's one of my favorite. And to be clear, we're looking at a work on paper, which is the ideation of the gesture on the wall, or the reflection of the gesture on the wall. And so it goes back to where I started with this notion of surface, and surface can be plane, plane, and plane can be sheet paper, plane can be wall architecture. And sometimes it's just that, but here it is that but, then again, touch and gesture, this. Right, yeah. So the kind of, the distillation of the planar and the gestural is like, in a weird way, so profound and so beautiful with this pale blue, the kind of lightness of the touch It's like the least aggressive gesture you can imagine. It's almost like I hate this word caress, I don't know why I hate that word, but it almost is like, it's just
Yeah,
such
you
a
can
gentle
say that,
gesture,
yeah.
as opposed to like a muscular painterly gesture. So there's the kind of gentleness, the beauty of the pigment, the lightness of it, but the immediacy of asserting plane as surface and plane as a place of touch and gesture. Like it's all there in this unbelievably simple but unbelievably complex.
Also, the fact that it's going to disappear.
Yeah, ephemeral. It's so modest and full of doubt, but also so assertive.
Yeah,
Super.
it's in your
super
face.
Smarter than we are.
Yeah, this is a gesture.
Yeah. It's meta, and it's also like nothing. It's meta and it's nothing all at the same time.
And by the way, I love.
find this like so profound. This word.
And
Sorry.
by the way, I love the word caress.
I,
It sounds
It's
like
your-
what it
it's all
sounds like
yours.
what it is.
It's all
Anyway,
yours. Okay,
I
let's
love
keep
this. We could
going.
talk about this forever,
We're gonna
but this is a
watch on time
fascinating
for almost a
moment.
quarter. Well, this is too big a story for the
Yeah,
moment.
this is a long
This is too
story.
big a story.
Oh,
Let's keep
okay.
going.
By the way, you are all.
Come back
Read
in
the book.
15 years
Read the
and
book.
By the way,
It's
you.
super insanely important, but it's too long a story.
Except the singers, the perhaps working drawings and other visible things on paper, not necessarily meant to be seen as art, is a really long story. The singer drawings, it's a shorter story, but maybe too long for tonight.
What's
But
the
it's a
next
great
slide?
one.
I just want
Next.
to make sure we have some Q&A. What's
So
the next slide?
this is singer, and you are allowed to turn the pages.
yeah, take a
Yeah, that's the
look
least
at it.
important thing about. Okay, this is. I mean, this also gets to the same elemental distillation of simplicity and complexity that Blur does. I mean,
They're at the same time.
the vocabulary
Exactly the same
measurement
time. Yeah.
is epic, and it is almost runs the full arc of the career, although it comes in and out. But we should pause and talk about the notion of measurement.
Well, it actually came out of the Singer experience. The Singer was a sewing machine company, but then they were also in high tech and rockets and all that kind of stuff. And they had bombs, and they had a laboratory out in New Jersey, and they were in competition with what was the one that Rauschenberg was at? Bell Labs. So Singer wanted an artist too, and there was a competition, blah, 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 and I got it. And so it was basically like a think tank situation. I just sat around all day, 3 days a week, and talked to these engineers and scientists. And basically all we were talking about was, what do we have to talk about? And it came down to this notion that for them, the only truth was something that could be proven, and the only way to prove it was through measurement. So you could repeat it. You can repeat measurements, then you have something that's true. And there are a few intermediate steps in this, but it just occurred to me, there's a beautiful sentence in Wittgenstein where he says, I want to see the world as I found it, the world as I found it. And I thought, that could be interesting. What's the world as I found it? How do I show what I've seen? And this is like taking anything out of the world and making it into my artwork just by measuring it. Nothing more. That's it.
And for me, I mean, these measurement works also had a profound impact on me as a younger person, with this notion that, which is true, that, works of art from 18th century France, from the Renaissance, anywhere in history, any point in history, works of art help us to better understand our place in the world, right? We know this to be true. Works of art help us think history through the present, help us think the present through history. We know all of that. But with measurement drawings like this, it cuts out all it cuts out representation in favor of something purely factual and immediate. But what I love most is that they are always and forever present tense. like 1966, 1972, 1980.
Still
It's
8 inches.
It's still 8 inches. It's the way that they insist on migrating forever into your present tense and into your space is, again, it's like the blur. It's something seemingly so simple, but so unbelievably profound. And of course, this vocabulary migrates to the wall, to architecture, to larger spaces. But this is in a way one of the purest distillations.
Yeah, this is the beginning.
This is the beginning, and it's like it's forever right now on that surface, and that freaks me out in the most exciting way. Sorry to overshare my own.
No, that's a great interpretation. You know, one does things and they don't really always know what they're doing. I mean, or what the ramifications of it will be.
Yeah, you have a job to do, and
Yeah.
we have a job to do.
Well, yeah, I like giving you some work. You try things. They don't always work, but sometimes, you know, sort of like this drawing, you hit the jackpot.
There's something too, I mean, when I was a young person thinking through Ryman and felt so liberated, the painter Robert Ryman, who would work mostly square and almost exclusively white, sometimes layered with color. But there is nothing in a Ryman painting that's not available. All the information is present, right? The bolts, the hanging device, the pigment, the surface, there's nothing hidden. I mean, it's almost more Stella than Stella, that like this idea that nothing.
Well, there's no metaphor.
There's no metaphor.
There's no metaphor.
It's so perfectly literal. I remember feeling so excited by Ryman painting as a young person because it felt so democratic and so free and so available. Like you don't need Bible stories. You don't need iconography. It's just the physical materiality of this and you in a space. And I was electrified by that. And then I found measurement, and it was like, oh, Mel cut out the middleman. Like, right? I want the pure fact of this dimension in space in real time, and that's actually poetry. To give you that, like that, it's a very profound gift to the world.
I'm stay with measurements, but I'm gonna jump from this to this, because now we're looking at something very different, not in terms of concept, but in terms of, we went from paper to wall, so we have a wall drawing, but we went to also from something, in a way, minimalist, almost to Rococo.
Complexity here.
And I'm curious how you got to this.
Well, there are different ways to measure things. One is with a roller, and the other is with a formula. So this is about, you know, measuring with formula for, you know, the area and circumference of a circle. But I also want to continue the notion of the working drawing, because I had done those books of working drawings, but they tended to be, you know, like 8.5 by 11 sheets. And I was thinking, like, how can a working drawing integrate into the world? Well, if the working drawing was both the working drawing and the work itself. And the way to do that was, you know, use the formulas for a circle and use the wall as a gigantic piece of paper to figure out the measurements for the circle with, you know, some mistakes, whatever. I showed this piece in 70 or 71 at MoMA in Kinnison McShine's show, Information.
71.
71, thank you. And it was like the most ultra-conceptual exhibition. And then I had this huge circle on the wall all smudged out. And it got a really hostile reaction, particularly from my so-called friends and colleagues, because it was like, You can't bring back abstract expressionism now. It's just the moment for conceptualism. You're doing abstract. It's not abstract expressionism. No, it's not. No.
But there's touch and there's gesture.
Yeah, which was verboten.
Yeah, but
Verboten.
in the space of ideation, almost diagnostic.
Exactly.
This is like, for me, this is your Twombly moment, like epic but diagnostic, epic but full of doubt, like epic but canceled. It's like size pencil marking on canvas. Like this is.
I guess there is, yeah.
Big, but like what? Like thinking out loud. You're thinking out loud.
Is this the first time you've reconstituted it since MoMA?
Yeah.
So that's why it has the date 1969 and 2020. Yeah, it was made in 69 and then 2021. Just see that slash.
It was done in
along.
my studio in 69, then later at MoMA in 71 or whenever.
But you probably dated it 69 at MoMA.
I don't remember.
I would assume you did, because that's when you made it. You're just recreating the 69
Yeah,
drawing.
That would be logical, but.
We could keep going on dating.
Yeah.
I'm recognizing it's 6 minutes to the top of the hour, and clearly we could keep talking until 10 p.m. this evening easily.
Do you want to talk
But I
about?
also want to make sure that, I mean, that's incredible. We could go to Mel for that, but also to recognize that if there are questions or comments from the audience, the great thing about this space is that when you're on the stage, we're actually really close. Like, questions or comments don't need a mic, I don't think. So please do shout out or stand or raise your hand or whatever if there are comments. But maybe we could just be respectful of time because I want people to get to the exhibition.
Yeah.
Kevin, you decide.
Oh,
You
God.
bought that drawing, so you're going to be self-serving and done that.
It's true. In fact, Emily had put a different slide in, and I put that in. I bought that when I was at LACMA, and out of, well, you remember I bought it out of a show. I thought I bought it out of your drawer.
Mark Selling.
Was it
Mark
Mark's show? Was it out of your show? Well, okay, better
We
memory.
do the stones, actually.
Yeah, the stones are
That's
so
the biggest
good.
break in terms of conventional drawing. Well, one of them anyway. So
And-
I think this is a great place to.
You'll see this in a slightly different format in the show. It's one line of circles.
Tell us what we're looking at, Mel, please.
It's called 5x4, and the top left-hand circle is 5 stones and no stones, or 0. Then 2 and 3, 4 and 1, 1, 1, 1 and 1. Just a very simplified way of thinking about the world. This was at the high point of earth art, which I thought, do you really have to go in the desert? And what constitutes, in this case, I was thinking the most minimal gesture that we can make in terms of changing the world. We can count it in different ways. So that's what this was.
It's true. I hadn't thought of it quite in that way. Like you were joking about, do you really have to go to the desert? But it's true. There was a kind of an arrogance to the kind of Heiser, Di Maria, Smithson, that kind of the scale. There was an arrogance to the scale.
Yeah, that macho.
I mean, we see it in Walter's film with the shoot. I mean, like literally with the shootout, whatever. But you bring so much of that vocabulary into this, again, a kind of modest DIY kind of space, which is, it has all of the epic impact in terms of the ideation of materials and gesture, but without the need for the scale.
Well, and it parodies the scale, but is an independent work of art that exists outside of that parody, and also has humor in it. And I find myself looking at it, and it's so simple. It's a bunch of rocks and some chalk. And I find myself looking at this endlessly, both at the mark making, because I watched you make it the other day, and I walked in and I said, "Oh, the master's at work," and he looked at me and he did this. It's really concentrating. And he said, "I'm not Giotto," which means I can't make a perfect circle, which was the legend of
No,
Giotto.
actually, it was one of the guys who was helping me said, who's that guy who's very famous for being able to draw a perfect circle? I said, Giotto. Yeah, Giotto. I said, I'm not Giotto.
So I'm anticipating, I'm hoping that some clever visitor, James will hate me for saying this, will take one of those rocks in the upper left quadrant out of the large circle and put one into the small circle and interact with it.
Kill them if they do.
Of course, I mean, security is very concerned about this, but we do have lots of extra rocks. That is not an invitation to take any.
I think I'm Not Jotaro is the perfect place to open up for questions.
Yeah.
Any questions?
We're coming to the top of the hour, but would love to hear from anyone.
And while you are thinking of your question, I will circle through some more of these slides.
Well, at least you're not asking me to take responsibility for 1966.
Exactly.
We're up to 71 now. We've moved
Ma'am,
forward.
in front, you have a question for Mel?
Yes, the rocks are beautiful. It reminds me of like the Zen garden in Japan.
That's a really good observation because I was very, very involved with Japanese sculpture. And I've always said that the first work of conceptual art is the Ise Temple in Japan, which is rebuilt every 20 years from scratch next door. This one is torn down. And they've been doing it for 1,000 years. So everyone is a replica of a replica of a replica of a replica. It's the most beautiful place you've ever seen. And now they can't find craftsmen that can do that kind of woodwork. They don't use nails. It's all joinery. And it just so happens that the Japanese Museum of Modern Art in Osaka just bought that whole work of mine, The Theory of Sculpture, all the pieces using the stones. So that's a really great observation.
Sir?
Mr. Bochner, Michael, avid collector of your work, which has become an increasingly challenging proposition in these last couple of years. But really one piece that stood out to me that I've never seen anything like it in your collection before, or your works before, is a small, perhaps 12 by 8 piece that you see behind you as you enter the exhibition today. It's titled Self-Portrait, and it depicts a small animal, perhaps painting numbers on a canvas there. And it really, I think, gives us a window into the vast scale and type of works that you're capable of accomplishing, but I've never seen anything like it. Provide some context to that work. Tell us, do others exist like it?
No, it's unique. It's a postcard from the Louvre of a Chardin painting, which I loved, and I bought it as a postcard. And as I was looking at it, the canvas is empty in the painting. So I thought I'd fill it in with some numbers. And then I realized by doing it, it was kind of a self-portrait. And then Edward Kopp, I know he's here somewhere, pointed out to me that there was a history of monkey painting in the 18th century, like paintings of monkeys doing human things. I don't
One
really.
upstairs.
Oh, is there?
Well, that's a monkey orchestra
No, that,
painting as well. It refers to art as the ape of nature,
I didn't know.
old
that.
Latin
we got
tag.
a couple monkey things, but that,
Yeah, so
digress.
that's how it happened.
I should say, also, I love that you introduced yourself as an avid collector of Mel Bochner's work, so thank you for being here. And when we move from here to the exhibition and the reception, Kevin, Emily, and Mark and staff from P&B have actually put together a whole selection of Mel's work, not in the exhibition, for us to view while we have a sip of champagne or something
Right.
in a minute.
But by the way, I'm tasked. It's 5 o'clock,
Yeah.
and the museum actually closes at 5.
Not for us.
Not well for
Not for us.
right, not for those who are invited. Yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, okay.
What's your,
So we should go into, no, that,
that was it?
I don't know anymore. I'm, Joe,
So, no, I think we can.
time to end.
I think we can wrap up. We're going to, first of all, I would thank all of you for being here. Mostly, of course, most importantly, thank Mel for sharing your time and your thoughts with us. I think it's safe to say we've been looking at beautiful slides at scale, but much more important to see the works for art themselves. And I think I'd like to invite all of us to this exit, go to the exhibition, and we have a reception in the Prints and Drawings Study Center. And again, more works of Mel. So conversation to be continued as we look at works of art together, both in the exhibition and the Study Center. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And see you in a second.